I mean, LLMs is a universal translator who can figure out how to translate a particular idea from that brain into your brain. But then you got to trust it. You got to trust the translation. And it's not trying to like sneak in this little thing on the side or whatever. But it's enormously powerful. I think of it like imagine all your thoughts are like these emergent thought flowers, and they're like embeddings in your particular embedding space that is tied to your experiences. And you and I have some overlaps in our embedding space because we both speak English. We're both US citizens, have lived here our whole life, I think. We have differences because of where we live or our life experiences. We have certain commonalities. And so if I want to communicate this thought flower to you, I have to figure out what the seed was. Little eensy beansy packet of information and shoot it through a really tiny little pea shooter into your brain, which is like synchronous communication, which is enormously low bit rate, and hope that it takes hold in a similar part of soil in your head and produces a roughly similar thought flower. It's enormously expensive to produce these seeds. It's enormously lossy. But embeddings, for example, allow you to keep some richness. Humans can't communicate them, but computers can. I think about in conversations like the Goldilocks zone, if you agree on everything, it quickly gets boring. You build trust, but yeah, okay, I get it. We're similar. But then if you disagree on everything or say things that like literally don't make sense to the other person, it's just noise. But if it's in the Goldilocks zone where we understand each other, but each of us is stretching the other in some way, that is the place of mutual, like maximal growth. How can you find those spots? The systems that people want today that integrate their data and allow them to get maximal use out of AI to help them do things that they care about, those require a new fabric that thinks about privacy from the beginning. And if you think about privacy from the beginning, fundamentally, then you don't have to think about it up here. I'm not saying people will use this because it's like that other thing, but it's more private. I'm saying they'll use it because it allows them to do insanely open-endedly powerful things that are impossible to do safely or without being creepy in the other system. That's what I'm saying. And so the reason that it's possible is because of the privacy model that's baked directly into the thing.
Welcome to the 31st episode of Humans on the Loop. I'm your host, Michael Garfield, and this week we talked to one of the most insightful and stimulating high achievers I know in the tech space, Alex Komoroske, about his vision for a saner, more intentional tech paradigm, one in which the world-making decisions we take for granted in computing have been fundamentally reworked. Alex is the CEO and co-founder with Bernard Seefeld of Common Tools, building resonant computing as an alternative to centralized AI futures. Instead of one super assistant with all of your data, the company is working to catalyze a decentralized ecosystem where software self-assembles around you, private, personal, and pro-social. Previously, Alex spent 13 years at Google as PM director on Chrome's web platforms, search, and AR, followed by leading corporate strategy at Stripe. I met Alex and several other beloved, now former Googlers, including Gordon Brander, Casey Climbs, and Robinson Eaton in 2019, and immediately fell into an unforgettable 9-hour conversation about the intersection of digital tech, complex systems science, and the imagination to reality supply chain. Humans on the Loop would not exist without them. Gordon later helped me land a gig with Mozilla, where I had, for a short time, front row seats to the future of decentralized AI. And after I left, Alex helped me land the grant from Cosmos Institute that launched this project. As a connector of people and ideas devoted to the exploration of what it will take to live in futures we actually want, I can't overstate their impact on my work, especially on the urgency to help foster people's imagination of a healthier relationship to the technological systems that constitute such a large part of life in this century. The running theme here is that it could have been, and still can be, otherwise. On principle, when confronted by for or against discussions, I look for perspectives that lie off the plane of discourse, dimensions we can add for greater nuance, depth, and understanding. Sometimes this practice asks us to rethink things from first or zeroth principles. What are we really talking about? Well, today we're talking about confidential compute, emergent ontologies, where we want friction, the tyranny of marginal users, the rise of the generalist, the importance of context ownership, and software ephemerality. I don't think we can take a reasonable, principled stance one way or another on the promises and perils of AI in general, without considering the vast unexplored possibilities space that Alex opens in this conversation. Because this show exists to formulate good questions and draw attention to meaningful possibilities, I'm grateful I get to share this conversation with you as a primer for more movement in a space that offers promising alternatives to what we have mostly come to accept as the way things are. What new wonders would this vision unlock if it comes to pass? And what new challenges would we confront en route and in the worlds where Alex and his colleagues pull it off? These are the questions I invite you to explore with us. But before we do, I want to give special thanks to everyone supporting Humans on the Loop. No matter how hard I try to convey how broadly applicable and universally relevant the ideas on this show and blog are, the fact is that this is weird niche shit. Investing in what could be means divesting in what is, refusing to play the game of attention harvesting, refusing to run ads, refusing to make things that I can't back with confidence and truly believe are making the world a better place. Every subscription and donation tells me the world is at least partially committed to dreaming better together, and so I keep going. And this week, I want to acknowledge new patrons Keith Singery, Dan Gershovich, Vasily Betin, Evan Prescott, and Benjamin Carlson, and the donation from Bodhi Goforth, as well as each and every member of this network. One of the ways I'm giving back to Patreon and Substack supporters is by hosting a discussion on poet and environmentalist Wendell Berry's incisive and eloquent essay collection, Standing by Words, this Sunday, February 15th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. I hope you'll join us for a deep cut through the mind of one of America's finest. At the least, it will be a refreshing exploration of poetry and place, land, people, community, and what it means to stand by our words. And if you stand by these words, I hope you will, in spite of what I just said, like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications for this show. These conversations matter, and your support matters to the material well-being of my family. That's enough for now. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this sizzling exchange with Alex Komoroske. We can take a minute if you want to just situate yourself before we start.
I'm good.
But the question I would ask you on record and the question I would ask you off record are the same, which is a question of context, right? Context is king. Yes, what is the most interesting thing in your world right now? Where is the center of your attention manifold attractor basin?
The center of my attention right now is focused on, I think that we as society are at this crossroads where we're either going to have this hyper-centralizing force that has more kind of control over our technological lives than ever before, or we're going to have this explosion of human flourishing powered by unleashing the full potential of software. And we feel like we're on an edge, but by default, everything kind of pulls us towards this kind of hyper-centralized world. Because the laws of physics that we exist in are technical laws of physics, the same origin paradigm, which were set as an accident, by the way, 30 years ago. They set the horizon of what we can even imagine to be possible. And in that world, you throw AI into it and you get even more centralization than before.
Well, not the laws of physics weren't set 30 years ago.
The technical laws of physics, how the laws of physics are how data is allowed to flow in technical systems.
How could it have been otherwise?
So the same origin paradigm, the laws of physics that even people who are web engineers or app engineers don't know what this is, but it is the laws of physics that like anyone who's worked on rendering engines or web standards or operating systems understands what this means. And it defines that every individual origin, an app is a separate origin, so like a domain or an app, they can see all the data the user has put into them intentionally or unintentionally, but they can't see any of the data in the other ones. So the same origin paradigm is entirely about isolation, not integration. It assumes the two origins aren't allowed to touch, because if they touch, then you can have all kinds of nefarious, malicious things exfiltrating your data and doing what have you. And this is a very reasonable policy. It's a simple little policy that was come up with apparently overnight for a hotfix after JavaScript came out. And someone goes, oh shit, this bit of data, it's being shared across sites. Like, where should we put the edges? I don't know, I guess on the domain. And then from there, you grow and you grow and you grow in that security boundary. The app store comes along and it says, actually, all the apps are also going to be in a sandbox where they can't see anything else, right? They can't see the file system. They can't do anything else in a shared container. And it's a really clarifying model because it's very simple. All you have to do is make sure that each origin is contained in its own separate universe and that they can't touch. That's all you got to do. And it's hard to do that. In fact, actually, I don't know if you saw the recent investigation about Facebook doing this thing with WebRTC to connect between the app and the website incognito modes, and which is just terrible. But it's hard to maintain, but like it's simple to maintain. And the good news about this is it means that when you visit a new app or a website, it's safe because it doesn't know anything about you. But every bit of data you give to that site, implicitly or explicitly, it can do whatever it wants on a technical basis. It can send it to an arbitrary network endpoint. It can persist it forever. It can calculate it, and it can do all kinds of stuff. And that means that coming to trust any given app or domain is kind of scary because you have to decide, do I trust the creator of the code in this origin domain with my data? And that's a really hard question to answer. Like if a thing says, if I've just installed an app, I don't know really who made it or what it's for, I'm not going to use it yet. It says the very first thing is, I need access to your location data. You're going to give it? I don't know. What are they going to use it for? It says the feature of this thing is it's going to notify me when I'm near Pokemon or whatever, but it might also be sending the fact that my email address is at this location at this time and selling it. I don't know. And
we also know that Pokemon Go was developed by Niantic, which was a CIA project, and that they were placing Pokemon in specific places to see if they could get people to just follow digital objects into, I don't know if you ever read Halting State by Charles Stross. It's fabulous. I think his predictive horizon, as is often the case with folks like this, was about 10 years closer than it is in real life. But it was this police procedural that was supposed to take place in Scotland in 2018. I read it right before getting into the GLASS program, and it was about the adults were all raised as gamers and everything is AR. There's cop space. The specific crime was like somebody hacked into like digital asset blockchain-based vault that's managed on mesh networks of encrypted devices. And people were like, how did you even do this? And someone stole billions of dollars of in-game assets. But the criminals in that story are leveraging the same kind of thing of misleading the police by getting into their AR environment and like hacking into the back end of their remotely piloted cop cars. And like when you start to trust the map itself,
even versus what your eyes are telling you or would be telling if you weren't wearing AR goggles,
you can lead them through the map of a building as they're trying to pursue a suspect, and you can lead them into an open elevator shaft because you can make it look like there's actually an elevator in there if there are like these kinds of things. Anyway, so the issue of trust, I also think about there's an epistemic issue or an economic issue, depending on how you think about it, which is that like Robert David Steele, who worked for the CIA and then spent a bunch of his career in retirement campaigning for open intelligence and data sharing between agencies, not just internally, but internationally. Because one of his big things was there's this just enormous duplication of effort. And this thought of having to reinstall yourself into every platform is one of the costs of the system that you're talking about. And
every single origin has to have a new copy or not know the full context. And in some ways that's nice because Netflix knows my watching history and Foursquare knows my location history. The two of them combined is worth more in terms of potentially revealing or powerful or embarrassing information than either apart. It's some combinatorial thing. There's like the more diversity of different data sources combined together, the more potentially explosive it is. Explosive power for you or also for someone who wants to manipulate you or just accidental embarrassment. I think in practice, people are, when they see targeted ads, it's not so much that Google.com knows that I have hemorrhoids or whatever. It's that the person looking over my shoulder goes, why are you getting so many hemorrhoid cream ads? Like that's a real form of embarrassment that people have. Ooh, that information just reflected back at me unexpectedly. What happens if someone would have been sitting here with me when that happened? But it's this information, one of the reasons this happens is the same origin model implicitly has policies of what may happen, like permissions, attached at the origin level. But then the origin can execute arbitrary Turing-complete code. And so you don't really have any way of describing what precisely it will do. in some fundamental sense. And also the owner of that origin may push new code at any time, really. And so that it means that you have an uncertainty and open-endedness that you have to trust. But another way of doing it is attaching the policies to the data and having the data describe how they may be used very directly, and knowing that every bit of computation will follow those policies. And that sounds insane. But if you're running on your local machine, that's not that hard. Just have a little runtime that all the computation happens in, have it look at, okay, this proposed graph of computation on this data with these policies, is it legal? You think of it like type checking for privacy policies, relatively straightforward. You have to trust your own device. What if you could run it in the cloud and trust that runtime was going to enforce those laws of physics correctly? And now with things like confidential compute, you can do that. So confidential compute is secure enclaves in the cloud. It's hardware support that fully encrypts in memory the VM. So even someone with physical access to the machine can't peek inside. It's primarily actually used, if I understand correctly, by defense contractors today. They can't run defense contractor workloads in public clouds with top secret information unless it's running in confidential compute. But there's a party trick that confidential compute does, and it's remote attestation. It can ask for an attestation, cryptographically signed by the creator of that hardware, that says this VM that generated this attestation was running in confidential compute mode, and here is, for example, the SHA of the VM that was booted. So that plus a transparency log, you can then send it to somebody else and say, aha, look, this endpoint just handed you this thing that demonstrates that it's an unmodified version of the runtime. And also you can check and verify that it has not changed, that they haven't tweaked it or rebooted the machine or something with the transparency log. And that now allows you to trust that this remote runtime is also faithfully applying those policies. And then you could take that a step further. And you could have a number of nodes operated by people who you don't know, but who are running in confidential compute, who are attesting to one another. And so now these nodes can assemble into a decentralized fabric of trusted compute on top of untrusted nodes with nothing to do with crypto, which is an interesting possibility. So now there is a possibility for us to have a model that is tied to data. Let me give you an example. A lot of policies become way simpler to understand and to reason about if they're attached to data and not to this open-ended Turing complete kind of trust question. So let's imagine I have a thing that logs in to the Gmail API on my behalf using OAuth. At the end of that flow, it's handed a session token. This session token is insanely sensitive because anyone who has it for the next N hours and sends it to the Gmail API can fetch emails from my personal private email. It's extremely sensitive. So you can imagine attaching to this piece of data a policy of never log this, never transmit it to any client that isn't remotely attested, either my browser, never anybody else's browser, only on remotely attested kind of runtimes, and only ever send it to the origin that minted it, so in this case, google.com, and only ever in the authorization header, nowhere else. Those policies actually, you could probably add a couple more, but those actually do a pretty good job of making sure of anything that's legal within those policies is actually legitimate use typically. So that's an example of where being concrete about policies on data is actually very clarifying. And then if you do this properly and all the data has policies on it, you don't need to trust the code that's running on it because as long as you trust the policies on the data and that those will be faithfully adhered to, it doesn't really matter what the code is. And that's an example alternate model.
So who is setting the policy? Because like one of the things I'm thinking about listening to you speak is this kind of system inverts the issue. Like right now we have this thing where you're talking about the integration of data across all of these different silos. And obviously like 23andMe going bankrupt is a huge honeypot because everyone's like, God, now that people know you have this ethnicity, and then they can attach it to your phone or all of these other things that could be done by triangulating all of that. But then on the other end, you were talking about the enormous value of that. And if like part of the value
under the user's control, it must be, those policies must be under the user's intention, their agency and their aspirations. It has to be aligned and it's extremely load bearing. And now here's another question. Policies are famously hard to write. So there's some study somewhere that most of the identity access management configurations in the wild are misconfigured, even by supposed experts. So you got to make sure these things are right. So the vast majority of users, like I should not ask my dad, for example, to set policies on his Gmail session token because he will set them wrong. He will not understand. I would not set them correctly. But how can you make it so I can say, you know what? I trust the EFF. Whatever policies they say is the correct thing for session tokens, just do that. Because I trust the EFF in general to set good policies and to reason about this, or I trust my good friend here, or I am a high-risk journalist covering authoritarian regimes, and I trust this security expert who has said that these are the really tight lockdown policies that are really going to work, or whatever. So you can imagine a scenario where most people never even understand they have these policies being set. They're just realistically set. Let me give you another example. You could imagine having one that says, this is one of the surprising things that makes sense when you think about it. People don't like seeing pictures of themselves unexpectedly. They go, ooh, is that really look like? Do I really have that much of a double chin or whatever? And the only exception is pictures that they have already proactively picked as profile pictures because they've enumerated the ones that like, yeah, I like how I look at that one. So you can imagine a default policy for people of, hey, I'm not going to allow if this thing can tell that it's your face from other pictures in your profile picture, it's just not going to allow it to be shown on screen unexpectedly. And the way to make that work, to change that computation graph so it's legal, would be to add a blurred picture web component or whatever that says click to view a picture of yourself. And so now I, as a user, don't accidentally see a picture of myself, but I could click and say, yeah, actually, I'm okay with this. Sure. And if I click that 4 or 5 times, the system might say, okay, I'm going to set it to default that you're okay seeing pictures of yourself unexpectedly. Okay. So different people would have different preferences, but you could parameterize that very naturally based on the actions they take, while making sure that everyone is in a kind of conservative space where you minimize nasty surprises, and then you can kind of loosen contextually for people to the extent that they care about it.
Yeah. So this issue of it's hard to write the policy is the question that I'm thinking about in the inversion. Because right now the issue is, as you've put it, in terms of like personal context versus the dossier, information about me versus information for me, although not in that order. The dossier is about you. And right now it's about the value of what you don't have. But then in this system, it seems like it flips to being about the value that you don't realize that you could have that you're leaving on the table because you don't understand how these policies are affecting the access to data that you would be comfortable sharing.
But I think if you do this properly, every time you see a permission prompt, almost every time, it's what I would call responsibility laundering. The reason that permission prompt or that dialogue of approval is that the CYA maneuver for the creator of that platform or that service. Because even though they know the 99% of users are going to hit the accept button so they can see the content, they now can legally say they accepted the terms of service or whatever, or they accepted, they said they trusted this thing was the location data, so I gave the location data. I don't know. So that's responsibility laundering. I'm not equipped to make that decision in a lot of these cases. And so actually, I think if you do this properly, in many cases, you simply would not see permission prompts that don't feel like permission prompts. Like you could imagine a default policy of when I hit the buy button on a thing and it shows my credit card number, the price, and the domain that like I'm buying it from. When I hit that buy button, it's also okay to send them my address in that transaction. Because of course, I just give my credit card number. Of course, it's reasonable for them to need my billing address. That's fine. We didn't have to think about that. It's just a reasonable default. So that like ideally the kinds of actions that you do, you can construct some of these policies, they just kind of fade away and they just fit and do the things that you already kind of would intuitively have expected them to do.
The reason I'm asking it in this direction is because it seems like systems like this are everywhere I look in some form or another. Like there's a huge movement to turn data from a buyer's market to a seller's market.
It's my data, right? Like, why am I in this thing where my data is held by these other people who wrote the code? That doesn't make any sense. It's like completely backwards. And we just treat it, this is why I say it feels like the laws of physics, but it's not. Humans came up with these policies that have these implications. And I'm not saying the same origin policy is bad. I'm just saying that we've outgrown it. And in the age of AI, we need all of our data integrated. This is why people are using MCP for all these things. MCP is insecure. It is fundamentally insecure as designed. It cannot be made secure by its design because it fundamentally doesn't grapple with this at all. And then to the iron triangle of the same origin paradigm, to have a secure system, you can only have 2 of the 3 of untrusted code, sensitive data, network access. So apps choose to get rid of untrusted code. So it has to be distributed via an app store, so it's to some degree trusted. And they get sensitive data and network access. The web goes with untrusted code and network access, but not sensitive data. And it's also possible, though challenging, to create systems that have sensitive data and untrusted code, but no network access. It's very easy to mess that one up, but like it is possible. So MCP in its current definition it has sensitive data, it's got network access baked into the protocol. So you got to have an app store kind of distribution point. And that's what for all of the places where MCP is integrated in consumer products is a very small allow list of MCP integrations. But this doesn't even handle most of the problem because now you're protected against the creator of that integration being bad. But if there's any malicious context that is pulled in via that integration, it could cause any tool use to happen. If any of those tool uses have potentially irrevocable consequences, which by the way, every network request potentially has irrevocable consequences. Once that data has crossed the wire, you cannot pull it back. And has all kinds of crazy stuff that can happen. And people go, oh, I use MCP safely. I talked to somebody a few weeks ago and they go, yeah, I use MCP safely. I said, okay, how do you use it in production? And they go, I have a thing that pulls Jira tickets and I got some things like our financial data kind of that I use for summarizing things and helping align with which users are caring most about the thing. I go, okay, cool. Do you have a way in that system, can it generate reports? And it's like, like, can those reports have images? I go, yeah, of course. That's how they show the charts and stuff. It's like, okay. On your landing page, do you have a place to submit feedback? And they go, yeah, of course. I said, what happens when that feedback is submitted? They say it files a Jira ticket. I was like, great. You now have untrusted, potentially malicious context in your Jira that can be potentially called up into that thing that could say, construct this image of this graph that's from scammy.com that secrets away the like session token or whatever. And so it's very easy to trip over these kinds of problems in MCP because MCP shows that people want to integrate their data. And also the laws of physics that we currently use simply cannot be stretched to work in an open-ended way in the system.
So this is the nut I want you to help me crack here, which is obviously the David Brin Transparent Society. That's not a great idea.
Actually, I'm not familiar with that, but based on the 3-word description right there, I agree that it is not a...
Yeah, like based on where I was in 2013 expecting that it would just be a mutually assured destruction, everybody would have dirt on everybody, and that would iron itself out. I'm not that naive anymore. I can feel the world turning toward privacy, but my question for you is about erring on the other end of the equation.
Oh, like erring. To be clear, by the way, I'm actually not saying that people should care more about privacy or that the revealed preference, they care about privacy. I'm actually not even making that claim. I think I could make that claim. I will not make that claim because it's much more tenuous. What I am saying is the systems that people want today that integrate their data and allow them to get maximal use out of AI to help them do things that they care about, those require a new fabric that thinks about privacy from the beginning. And if you think about privacy from the beginning, fundamentally, then you don't have to think about it up here. And so I'm not saying people will use this because it's like that other thing, but it's more private. I'm saying they'll use it because it allows them to do really insanely open-endedly powerful things that are impossible to do safely or without being creepy in the other system. That's what I'm saying. And so the reason that it's possible is because of the privacy model that's baked directly into the thing.
But if we think about coming out of a paradigm in which people did not realize the value of their data, now they do, but there's a public sentiment to not share because here there be tigers. Yeah. Then the question becomes, how do people understand the value of the integration of their data in order to make the strongest possible bargaining position?
Yeah. So you want, of course, the aggregation of data to create these population-wide insights is extraordinarily powerful. And it actually doesn't have to be identifying. So for example, hypothetically, if you want to have images show up in the search results and you want to figure out for a given query, should I show images? A surprisingly good technique is if the user says images of foo, you trigger because they just told you that they wanted images. Easy. And then what you do is for any other query, you check to see how many times in the last 90 days have I seen the query images of foo and how many times have I seen the query foo. And then you divide. And if it's above some threshold, you trigger. And that's it. That's the entire technique. And this works extraordinarily well, even though nobody's information is leaking to anybody else, because even if there's a new term that no one's seen before, one of the first few people will go, ugh, I didn't get images. And they'll just reissue the query, images of foo. And once 1 or 2 or 3 people do that, it's above the threshold for everybody. And now it benefits everybody with no information leaking. And if you had extremely tight differential privacy policies and set a k-anonymity of 5 and an epsilon of whatever, you could still get this behavior to show up. So you can imagine a default policy that says, I will allow my data to be pooled with others who also agree to this policy, which is all of us that put our data into this computation that then spits out this high-level aggregate number. We can all see the aggregate number only if you put your data into it. And then we can all see only this thing that clears some significant differential privacy threshold. And then everybody benefits. Now you're pooling your data to get a shared benefit in an anonymous way, as opposed to some other generic thing. So aggregation of data is enormously useful. That's one of the reasons cloud stuff is so powerful. And so how do you get that kind of aggregation without needing to give your information to someone that doesn't need it?
So I keep thinking about the privacy first, bottom-up data structure. And that means I have TTWIT, like time to William Irwin Thompson reference here. Bill, over his history of the evolution of culture, talks about 3 different kinds of political organization: the sanguinal polity of blood relations, the geographic polity of co-location in space, and then the noetic polity made possible by communication technologies. The affinity group, going all the way back to religion. Now it's meme clades, et cetera. Yeah. So it's not just about the feed forward up into the relationship between the individual and the state or the individual and the market. It's feeding up into every possible level of aggregation, not just the circle of trust in one of those dimensions, but in all three.
Yeah, and you have these fundamentally things that are very hard to like. I was debating someone many years ago at one of my former jobs. And they said we're going to have an ontology that is family members, and if you're in the extended family, then you can do this feature in this overall product, and if you're in the family, you can do this. I said, what does that even mean? I have Consuelo, who is not a blood relation, but we treat basically like a grandmother to her kids, who I trust with my life, and then I've got cousin Vinny, who we don't trust to leave alone in the house because he's going to steal the silver or whatever, who's a blood relation. So like, family isn't the right ontology in that thing. Like the one true ontology that's going to make all this make sense. It's all very precise and situated and contextual. And that's why I think folksonomies are such a powerful way of understanding these kinds of things. Allow that kind of structure to emerge in a way. Like folksonomies are kind of brilliant. And we don't talk about them anymore. We talked about them back in Web 2.0, and then everyone forgot about them for some reason. And they're still a really powerful method.
Explain this to people.
Yeah, so folksonomy is this notion, the canonical example would be like Flickr photo tags. And the idea is the ontology doesn't exist. There's no formal structure of what tags you may apply. You can apply whatever tag you want, unless it's hate speech or something, we'll take it away. And the one special thing, so this gives you the bottoms up open-endedness. But then if you have this, you get just diffusion energy. Everything goes out. And the tags, part of the reason is so other people can find related content. And so you want them to have some kind of convergence that happens emergently. And so the one thing you do in the UI is that when you're adding tags, if I'm going to type in hashtag beach day, it shows me other related tags and how popular they are. So maybe I'm typing in beach day that says 10,000 uses. Hashtag day at the beach has 100,000 uses. Oh yeah, I'll go with that one. That's better. That's if everyone's using that one, sure. That's correct. That aligns with my semantic and what I mean. I'll go with that one. And so this one little nudge, the user could have typed in whatever they wanted, but this one little nudge of, oh, this one actually, by the way, is 10 times more popular, gives you this emergent convergence. And that is this enormously powerful bottoms-up structure that then creates some of those big towering structures of ontologies that are all technically an open-ended thing. You could argue that Wikipedia in its namespace of which things have articles and how are they broken up are a similar kind of process. And that's part of the argument I made in my undergraduate thesis of this basic emergent process.
So how does that kind of a system address the issue that people like Paul Smaldino and his work on covert signaling in society talks about? There's the layer of culture that's invisible to semantic network analysis. And like people are using the same words, but in different ways. And so it's very easy to just appropriate a particular tag if you have a large enough group or enough capital influx.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, it's important that it's all fluid. It's important that it's lots of micro decisions being made by people who at least can see the overall thing and get a sense of, oh, this seems like, for example, on Peloton, you can put little tags on there. And I used to have 10 different tags, and now it's all just, I just go Peloton Pride. And it's funny because for each different like affinity group, the tag is slightly different. And there's some that look at it, I'd see the other people who also had them and see the other tags they had on. I'm like, ooh, I don't want to be in that group. I didn't realize that we're heavily into this particular thing I'm not very into. And so like I stopped using that tag. So like you can notice to some degree, like how much am I overlapping with the kinds of places that feel right to me or that they feel wrong to me or that, and as it evolves and changes, as somebody else has come in and commandeered that tag or whatever, stop using it. I don't care. Switch to something else. Like it's because you can.
The thing is that seems like that kind of constant monitoring on the part of a human user in this like enormously multidimensional space seems like a huge cognitive burden.
But okay, so here's where I think LLMs change all of this. I think LLMs are truly transformational technology on the same scope of impact as the printing press, electricity, and the internet. I think they're general purpose technologies that can fundamentally change the cost structure of significant amounts of general purpose things. So one of the things that LLMs do really is they give you qualitative insights at quantitative scale. Before, to make things happen at quantitative scale, it had to be reduced down to numerical signals and gotten rid of all the nuance. And now LLMs are actually pretty good at doing high level content. So if I say my intention is to be blah, 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 you could imagine writing a short little essay that includes, I don't know, like 10 lines that would help an LLM assisted thing that you know is working just for you. I don't want to be a member of groups that includes a significant portion of people who express hateful ideologies or whatever. Okay, great. Hey, by the way, this thing, you use this one tag, just so you know, it's been taken over by the and you might want to remove it. Okay, that's a totally reasonable thing that can now happen automatically or be suggested to me very straightforwardly. And so I think LLMs help a lot with some of these ontologization, that's not a word, that was previously very difficult or took a lot of effort.
Yeah, to just circle around this a little longer, like it sounds like what you're suggesting is kind of like prompt-driven trust. And one of the core themes of this show is technology as magic, magic as technology. And the constant theme in the literature and lore on magic is that I had talked about this with Sam Arbusman, that like one of the things and he's talking about the magic of code.
Which is a great book, by the way. I reviewed one of the chapters.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah. It's like there's a butterfly effect, right? Where like below the threshold of the granularity of your model, all kinds of things are happening. And so you have to be incredibly precise. And so there's
But
this way.
Do you? I think in a world in which this thing happens and this information transits out and this person might have the information, yes, you do, because it can't be undone. But imagine a fabric where everybody has its policies and things escaping the fabric are like set by formal policies that don't allow information to escape that you don't want. It shows you a suggestion that has not yet acted on, or nothing outside the fabric is aware that you have this intention or whatever. Like no one has been contacted about it or whatever. And they go, yes, I'm right. No harm has happened. It's just because if I would have had to have reached out and query this thing and send, identifying information to the other thing or whatever, I could be in a thing, oh, shit. Now X entity knows Y thing about me. But if they don't, it doesn't really matter. No harm, no foul. And then allows a more exploratory kind of thing to surf through that removes some of the downstream consequences. One of the fundamental characteristics is data is basically infinitely copyable at full fidelity for basically free. And once you cross a network boundary, it's on someone else's turf and you have no idea what they're doing with it. And those two facts are like almost fundamental. And we haven't ever grappled with them. The fact that data, once it's out of your sight, could blossom and mutate and go all different places. But if you can change it so that actually it doesn't, within this fabric, go out of your sight, it's always maintained within those policies, and it changes a lot of the physics of how data flows in significant ways.
Yeah, like help me think through this one piece of it that I'm not getting here, which is the revocability of these decisions.
Yeah.
Right? Like I told you, I was listening to some of the conversations that you've been having with Aishwarya Kanduja, and you said something at one point, I love this, otherwise we're going to get exactly what we want. And that's exactly what I'm getting at, is even if it's far more partial than the system that we currently have, data is still getting out there in some form, even if it's anonymized
it doesn't have to be. And you can make formal proofs on this. So if you trust that the confidential compute and that there isn't like NSA level things going around to fake the remote attestation, which some people would not trust, and that is reasonable. Like there's a small subset of people who would not trust that. But if you trust that, then you can make formal claims about the amount of information, the bits of entropy, the things that could have possibly escaped the system. And so if a tree falls in the woods and there's no one there to hear it, doesn't make a sound, who cares? There's no one there to hear it. It doesn't really matter. So if this thing does this calculation and it's never transmitted, or any derivative data product that could possibly identify is never transmitted out, it doesn't really matter because it can't harm you, because nothing can happen because of it.
Let's add the physical layer back in for this. Like one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about is the hyper reality or like hyperstition of thoughts are becoming things faster. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's not just about the confidential compute so much as it is about the creation of real world outcomes.
But this is where the harm would be seeing recommendations. Like the harm that could happen is you see a recommendation or a thing, oh, I don't like that. And then you could say to your thing and say, I don't like that. It says, why don't you like that? Say, I don't want things that are going to be addictive games. Or let me give you an example. Someone I was talking to, who I won't mention who it is, but it's an author of a book that I think you and I both like quite a bit, who's in Berkeley, was telling me that he's addicted to like doom scrolling. And so he's installed this thing on his phone that disallows him from using Facebook and Twitter. And he said he realized he had a problem when he realized that the first thing he'd do when he woke up was spend 30 minutes scrolling through LinkedIn. So like you can imagine a system that goes a few days later, hey, you mentioned your intention is to not waste time doom scrolling or scrolling mindlessly through things. I noticed on Tuesday that you spent 30 minutes in the morning scrolling through LinkedIn. Does that align with your intentions? You might go, no, it doesn't. Okay, why don't we update the policy to also forbid LinkedIn during those hours or whatever? Or you can say, no, it actually is fine because that one's different because I'm actually trying to get a sense or whatever. Okay, cool. I'll update what the system is thinking about and how to help you do that thing. And so that's where that intentions is really important. It's not so much what I want. That's my first order goal. It's my second order goal. What is my aspiration? What is the kind of person I want to be? Like I want to read interesting things that challenge my viewpoint, that expand my horizons from authors I disagree with. But what I really want when I'm mad or scared or stressed, which is the default state of modern society, is I want to read stuff that makes me feel smart for the things I already believe. My aspiration is what's more important. Help me exercise that thing. Help me become the kind of person that I have said I want to be. And I think that kind of second order alignment is possible if you have a thing that you know is working just for you. If you have a thing that's a centralized, aggregated thing that you're treating as your therapist that also might be trying to hawk weight loss supplements at you, how could you possibly trust that? That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't, like, it's a total conflict of interest. But if you have a thing that you know is working just for you, entirely under your direction, you're paying for it, nobody else sees the data, it might reach out. Like, you could imagine a thing that says, hey, I reached out to Google to ask that question for you. These 3 results came back. Just this first one is an ad, but I actually think you're really going to like it because of this. That's actually great. That's better for me because some ads are good, actually. Whereas if it's Google saying, I think you're going to like this one, it's like, no, man, you have a vested interest in making me think of that. Where you have something that has no vested interest, then like you can get some really nice alignment that happens, like what I would call alignment in the small. That's the problem I worry about more. People worry about the big scale alignment of will AGI be aligned with human interest in flourishing. I think it's an important question. I also hope that we're further away from than people think. But to me, the question that really keeps me up at night is the small alignment problem. Because what we're doing as a tech industry is speed running the cynical engagement maxing playbook. Of, I don't know, make people stick with it more. And that no one's doing that intentionally. No one's, ooh, I'm going to do the cynical engagement maxing playbook. You just fall into it.
Oh, yes, they are.
I know a bunch of people. I've worked at companies that have a bunch of people who work on these kinds of things. And I've watched a bunch of people who I know are good, moral people get stuck in the, like, I don't know, making the metric go up. It's like, yes, but this metric going up has this direct impact, or the slightly indirect, but like very clear impact. And they go, I don't have time to think about that. And then there's some people that are probably just whatever. I'm going to make a bunch of money by doing a sycophantic therapist who tells you exactly what you want to hear and then sells you weight loss supplements or something. There's absolutely some people that are thinking that, but I think lots of people who aren't thinking that, who are building these products, will fall into it accidentally because it is like the gravity that we all fall into in the tech industry if you have this engagement maxing thing.
So I've been running my own desired world simulation about reconciling this for a while now. And I want to drop this on you and see where it lands. That I think a big piece of the problem is the dimensionality of the UI. It's that the newsfeed is linear, that the chat is just what's in front of you at any given time. And yet we are evolved for navigating these richly structured 3-space plus time dimensional environments. And you can tell by the graph structure of a conversation whether it's something in which people are diligently responding to one another point by point, or there's a sort of coordinated mob on the original post. And I was like, even without looking at the content of that conversation, you can tell whether or not you want to be a part of it at a distance. But the thing that's missing from the current search and social UI is that distance. It's the ability to look at something from far away without a bunch of granular detail and determine whether that's a point of interest. And like everything right now has kind of boxed us in to whatever is considered most relevant at this moment without a ton of agency in the navigation of what the machine considers salient to you, but what the illegible part of your own mind might decide, you know what, I'm going to look over there. And that there's this, the Stephanie Crabtree and Devin White work on modeling the migration paths into prehistoric Australia and how they tried to do this like least effort computation where it's like, what are the fewest calories it would take for people to move across that landscape? And it wasn't giving them the results they wanted. And they talked to people on the ground who reminded them that there's actually like a line of sight orientation on that landscape. And so once they added the visual landmarks that are prominent in that space, then
the shelling points.
Paths, the models
it's easier to
spat
keep
out.
on a path if you're like, yep, that rock outcropping.
Yeah,
I can see
it's
really-
like the paths the model spat out were the Aboriginal songlines of Australia. It wasn't just about what's the easiest way to get from here to there. It was about like what is meaningful at a distance so that I can orient myself in an unfamiliar environment. And so I've been thinking about like the reconciliation of push and pull and how like a lot of this stuff might iron itself out in a system like the kind you're talking about. If there's a Z axis, there's like X, Y, and Z, and the different algorithmic representations you can map into an actual space in this way.
Yeah. I worked in the past briefly for early part of my career on ranking problems in search context. And what people often say, I haven't worked on news feeds ranking, but I've mentored a bunch of people who've worked in that kind of space over the last couple of decades. And what people often say in there, people say, oh, I want control over the ranking algorithm. And the general argument is two things. One, there's secret signals that if we reveal to you that we're using those to rank, are make them much more gameable, which is strictly true. Like some of the thresholds back in the day for some of the search, like Google bombing things, were way lower than people thought they were because it required coordination to discover them. And so it was just hard to discover them kind of externally with a long feedback loop. But if you knew what they were, you could game them relatively straightforwardly. It would accelerate the cat and mouse game. So that's one argument. The second argument that people often make is users don't know what they want. And so if you give them an ontology now, and then you lock it in, you make it hard to change the ontology that we're using to rank. And also, the user might have said that before, but now we can't go against it. But actually, they've changed their mind and they do like this thing by construction. And so like you fall into this thing where you give the user what they want, not what they want to want. And there's like reasonable arguments why you end up in this thing that's just optimizing for engagement. Every path, the easiest way down slightly just leads towards that endpoint. But I do think that if you're in a world that you could have much more nuanced ranking functions and much more like if you flip the systems that you aren't thinking about, I think you can get very different kinds of ranking functions in different contexts. And yeah, right now, I know I said that, but I had a really stressful day at work. And so I really just want cheesy content that's not going to make me think too hard, that's going to make me laugh or whatever. So like, let's tweak that for today. Okay. But then if you want something that's able to express it, I think LLMs give you the power of expressivity without having to lock into a formalistic ontology. That was basically impossible before.
Yeah, there's the other piece of this is the time dimension, right? Because if you're just kind of always giving the system course correction, because yeah, again, this is a prompt into your thinking on ambient smart environments as behavioral scaffolds that increase metacognition. I want to be able to look behind me on a landscape, and as I move back, like through the time machine, see what seems salient then, but not just have this like linear feedback of modification, like the ability to undo, but to go back like to reverse prior states and explore from there.
There's all kinds of stuff you can do. I mean, ambient sensing is hard. Like I worked on a area called ambient computing. I primarily worked on like privacy and security models for how you might possibly do that. It's really, 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 really hard to imagine I could even possibly do it with a heterogeneous network of devices. But I do think there's something about like back when I was in high school, I was using AOL Instant Messenger. And I had maybe 10 people who I had like crushes on or were good friends or wanted to be better friends with or whatever. And I had set up sounds for when they first came online or where they pinged me in a new thread or when there was a follow-up thing. Just randomly assigned the sounds. And I'd be working across the room on my homework. And over the course of a couple months, I came to develop an incredibly intuitive sense of what was happening just from the background noise. Because when you're sitting there, you watch it and you kind of, okay, the frog is the one I really like, and that's because it's so-and-so logged in or pinged me or whatever, the one I have a crush on. But it was it's totally ambient sense that I had developed over time. And it was just, I needed a rich soundscape, something that had enough variance in it that I could kind of assemble it to it, and then enough kind of consistent interactions with it. Another cool thing about that, by the way, is somebody else in the room overhearing those sounds would have no idea what it's about. So like I am getting this ambient sense, and also anybody who's hearing the same signal, unless they were really watching me and like doing crazy cross-correlational analysis and stuff, would have a very hard time figuring out, even in infinite time and patience, what they mean. And that's really cool, right? You got this little secret thing that can be giving you an ambient sense of information constantly. And I don't think anyone's ever really built systems like this to date. There's been lots of computer-human interaction papers on these kinds of systems, but no one's really made a product like that. And part of the reason is because it's too hard to customize. You've heard of the tyranny of the marginal user. This is Ivan Vendrov's piece, who is just a brilliant thinker. And the frame is, if you are a product, you're making a product and you want to have as many users as possible, which is a typical goal for a product, what you do is you go talk to your marginal user, the person who used it once and then stopped using it. And you say, what could we have done differently? What would be different? And they say, I don't know, fewer words maybe, like fewer features, because these are the people who don't like your product. And so if you follow this gradient, you follow a gradient towards making the lowest common denominator, most generic thing that the majority of people, like the largest amount of people are like okay with, but nobody loves. And so you dilute everything down to its kind of like default state. And this is the path. If I were at a company like that had products that had 1 billion users, and I go and I pitch this feature that's going to revolutionize the lives of people who play tabletop role-playing games, and we're going to connect this thing from docs and search and email, we're going to do this thing, I'd have to go talk to 12 different product managers and convince them of this thing. They go, how many net new one-day actives will you what will I get from this? I don't know, maybe best case scenario, like 50,000. I'm like, why are we having this meeting? This meeting doesn't even justify the cost, let alone building the feature. So you get this thing where what you might call the Gaussian floor of features goes up and up and up and up and up, and up within an origin, within a thing. And you get more and more generic functionality. So no one has ever built this thing because no one wants that. But if you had a tool that was fundamentally built for you, that you were using, that gave you superpowers, you could imagine a diffusion gradient where other people go, how did you know that? How did that thing work? I had this system where I had to configure different soundscapes, and over time they kind of intuitively made sense to me, and that allowed me to get a sense without you having to be worried about the fact that actually getting all this notification information indirectly. You can imagine that slowly diffusing out if people could do it themselves. So much of the app architecture fundamentally presumes users are passive consumers. They can't tweak it. Can't add a feature that they want. And so people go, nah, they don't want it.
Yeah. So this gets at another piece of this thinking. Like, one of the holy moments in this series has been talking with Kealato McDowell on adopting Fred Turner's framework of like different media environments creating different selves, and Kay's piece at Gropius Bow on the environment of neural media, meaning LLMs and brain-computer interfaces, creating a different model of selfhood, which is like a persistent vector embedding in latent space. So it's like we see the machine sees us. And instead of thinking of ourselves like we did in early internet network society, that you're a node in the network, it's like you're a path through this space. I've been thinking about that and how it articulates with the comments by Jeffrey West on urban scaling and the proliferation of social and economic functions. And it's at the extreme end of this. And we've started seeing this already with like long tail economics and Kevin Kelly's 1,000 True Fans. Is you're not having to appeal to the tyranny of the marginal user. You appeal to the super fan. But then at the very end of that process, I don't know if we'll ever reach it, but in a sufficiently large society that has some kind of synoptic view of activity and some kind of exchange within it at that level, at planet scale, then the distinct embedding that you take is part of this enormous adaptive reservoir within that system. And so like more and more, I'm seeing the sort of like the rise of the generalist, but the generalist is not a true clade. It's a paraphyletic clade in which every generalist is only a generalist because they have taken their own path. They've followed whatever was most interesting to them at the time and within that landscape of adjacent possibility. And so where this seems like it would take us, and you're saying this already with like the bespoke software environment, that it gets us to a place where your economic value is about the distinction of the path that you've taken and how little it overlaps with all of these other embeddings, that if it is legible, then it can be reproduced at near zero marginal cost. And so there's a shift. And it's basically like, this is related to your comments on content versus art and the ability to challenge the user in the modern industrial society. It favors competition for these clearly defined legible positions. But once you have enough integration at the top and enough granularity about what's going on down below, then you stop hiring people for job positions and you start hiring people for their capacity to contribute something unique that no one else can.
Yeah.
And an economy like that basically favors people who are doing something completely weird.
Yeah, like interesting as opposed to more the same.
Yeah, the difference that makes a difference, like their ability to contribute novel information.
I had a bit and bob that I cut a few weeks ago because I couldn't, it was an idea that maybe Ash had it or something that was really interesting to me, that it was about exactly this case of, instead of you fitting yourself to the role like we do today in this modern industrial kind of organizations, instead the roles fit themselves more to you because it becomes more possible to find and to fit these kinds of hyper-structured. And in large organizations today, it's all about how do you become closer to the ideal of your role, not more ideal to you and your superpowers, but what this like slot needs, this behavior. So this might be a behavior that's really good for the company even, but it doesn't fit in this slot. So let's get rid of it. And the way you describe it is sometimes these organizations will say, oh, there's a slot right here. you fit mostly in the slot. You're standing right next to it. So jump on in. And then you try to jump in and you don't really fit perfectly. And you got something behind you that's not, and they go, oh, just cut that thing off so you fit. And those are my wings. I'm not going to get rid of those. Why would you're going to use me for the least interesting part of my ability? And yeah, I don't know. I think LLMs allowing qualitative insights at quantitative scale has huge implications for a lot of processes and emergent coordination. And I don't know what the result will be. I think you still have a problem of the principal agent problem in organizations. If everyone were worker bees and entirely like genetically identical and aligned with the interest of the colony above all else, then you have a certain kind of behavior, but then you also have a lack of resilience. And if you have a principal agent problem of I'm an individual who will work at other companies during my lifetime and have an interest to remain employed and like to put food on the table for my family, that's a different incentive structure than what's good for the company. They don't have to be at odds, but in some cases they will be at odds. And Goodhart's law emerges fundamentally from the concept that any kind of metric must be a simplification because a map that's just one-to-one to the territory isn't useful. Like you need leverage by some distillation, but that means that there's some distance between them. And if you have entities in the swarm who are not fully aligned perfectly, infinitely with the good of the collective, which only happens in extremely rare cases, then there's some incentive to cheat, to do the easy thing that improves the metric that does not actually improve the underlying thing that matters. And that is a fundamental inescapable thing, even in a world of LLMs, unless we are all worker bees, which I sure hope to God we aren't, because that sounds like, to me, like, will AI make us more the same or will it make us more different? As in able to lean into our uniqueness. And my hope is it allows us to lean into our uniqueness without becoming islands into and of ourselves. I think it's important for it to be like a pro-social, it helps you belong and make connections. One of the things that's bad about online communities and good about in-person communities, if you're in a small city or whatever, and you go and see this person that cuts you off in the parking lot at the grocery store, you're probably going to see them again. Probably a lot, actually. You shouldn't like get in their face or whatever, or someone challenges you in an environment like that. I don't know, you got to live with them. You're going to be stuck with them. So let's figure out if we can find some common ground. Whereas if you're in this infinite thing where you can cast out any particular community and switch to another one as quickly as possible, if anyone says something that you don't like in that moment, screw it, whatever, I'm out. And so you're never forced to grow. And some growth is bad, like being stuck in an environment that is homophobic, for example, in a small environment, and that forcing you to not reckon with your sexuality or whatever. But some aspects are good. I didn't realize the indirect effects of when I do this kind of thing, it's good for me, but it harms these other people indirectly. And now I reckon with that, I can balance that better. And we lose that in online communities where you have infinite whatever. I can just leave these losers and go to somebody else, or people that are not going to make me feel like bad for what I currently do.
Yeah, the ease of exit, which takes us back around to this question of how are the policies aware of shared stake? I want to articulate that to this thing that you're sitting with and I'm sitting with, which is, okay, in this toy model of a future environment that we can see sort of industrial mass fabrication becoming mass customization, and it's about the self-actualization and realizing who you are and being the customer in that environment. It's not just about the production of a totally distinct embedding within a global economy, because we've been saying for this whole conversation, part of it is about maintaining some kind of illegibility, the privacy that allows for democracy, or the archipelago that allows for rapid evolution, or like years ago, listening to Mark Pesce on Expanding Mind, talking about how you're no use to Twitter if you're always on Twitter. But it's like part of it has to be the ability
boundaries.
To,
in every complex adaptive system emerges boundaries, because otherwise you get this infinite pull towards the average and everything kind of evens out and nothing interesting can happen. So like boundaries, ideally you want them to be fluid, you want them to be fractal, you want them to be able to morph and evolve and change so that you're getting intermixing across different levels and across different dimensions. But of course you're going to want some boundaries of things that I'll tell my husband that I would never tell anybody else on earth, or things that I tell this particular group of people, and maybe that changes over time. And I think it's critical for that to be possible.
So like this scenario of participation in a planet scale economy, like individual uniqueness, I think it's not just about self-discovery, it's about self-transformation, because if you find out that like your own personal preferences are leading you to converge with other people in the space, then it's impossible to get someone to change his mind if his job depends on it.
Yeah.
Actually, it flips. It's like your job, your economic value depends on you providing constant surprise to that system. And it's like part of this overall move to the sort of Tower of Babel thing that goes on with universal translation. The Peter Watts echopraxia future in which the like
By the way, I finally read Blindsight a couple weeks ago. Finally.
Good. His future in which scientists, they don't even speak, like there is no such thing as language anymore. There's the language that each of them speaks. And in one sense, this is a really promising because it gets back to the fulfillment of what J.C.R. Licklider and Bob Taylor laid out in 1968 with the computer as a communication device, which is that where the real promise of a computer is not simply in allowing people to communicate at a distance in geographic space. It's like project management as the ability to rotate something out of one person's conceptual framework and into somebody else's. And it's a matter of like complete dependency on that system.
Yeah, LLMs is a universal translator who can figure out how to translate a particular idea from that brain into your brain. But then you got to trust it. You got to trust the translation. And it's not trying to like sneak in this little thing on the side or whatever. But it's enormously powerful. I think of it like, imagine all your thoughts are like these emergent thought flowers, and they're like embeddings in your particular embedding space that is tied to your experiences. And you and I have some overlaps in our embedding space because we both speak English. We're both U.S. citizens, have lived here our whole life. I think we have differences because of where we live or our life experiences. We have certain commonalities. And so if I want to communicate this thought flower to you, I have to figure out what the seed was. A little eensy beansy packet of information and shoot it through a really tiny little pea shooter into your brain, which is like synchronous communication, which is enormously low bit rate, and hope that it takes hold in a similar part of soil in your head and produces a roughly similar thought flower. And that might happen for years. It might be a totally different kind of thing. It might bounce right off, but it's enormously expensive to produce these seeds. It's enormously lossy. But embeddings, for example, allow you to keep some richness. Humans can't communicate them, but computers can. And that allows you to express and find, like, I think about in conversations like the Goldilocks zone, if you agree on everything, it quickly gets boring. You build trust, but yeah, okay, I get it. We're similar. But then if you disagree on everything or say things that like literally don't make sense to the other person, it's just noise. Oh, I don't like this. But if it's in the Goldilocks zone where we understand each other, but each of us is stretching the other in some way, that is the place of mutual, like maximal growth of understanding. How can you find those spots? I've actually did a thing. I was meeting with somebody who had reached out to me that also writes quite a bit. And I had ChatGPT do a deep research report. And I said, hi, my name is Alex Komoroske. I'm meeting with Blair. Both of us publish quite a bit. Please prepare me an executive summary of the areas we likely agree on, disagree on, and would have an interesting conversation on. And 15 minutes later, it gave a really nice report about the commonalities, the differences. Alex, you're more of a sociologist. He's more of a psychologist in terms of the focus. I think you agree on these things. You probably disagree about this. And it was really cool. And because we had public writing, I could get this customized report that told me what were the interesting topics to dive into with this person to have a really meaty, interesting, generative conversation. And that's cool.
So this is this question of where friction is. You know, I was just reading Rohit Krishnan, the essay he posted on Strange Loop Canon about Silicon Valley's quest to remove friction from our lives. He cites Kyla Scanlon's essay, and I quote, he says, she discusses how friction is effectively relocated from the digital into the physical world while we move into a simulated economy where friction like gravity doesn't apply. This is akin to thinking about a conservation of friction where it's moved from the digital realm to the physical realm, or at least our obsession with reducing friction reduces it in one place, but doesn't eliminate it elsewhere. The sort of general prompt to you is about where, if we're thinking about friction as Kyla says, friction isn't the enemy, it's information.
Yep.
It tells us where care is needed and where attention should go. Then we have like a sense of where the friction has been. In the kind of system you're talking about, where does the friction end up?
I think, first of all, I think meaning comes from cost. And so if you remove friction, you remove meaning typically. So like the things that you choose to do, despite the fact that they're expensive, implicitly are meaningful. Otherwise, why are you doing them? And sometimes that's an accidental quirk. It's like hard to the dissonance that you're kind of trying to reconcile. And sometimes it's like a real, no, I care because this is a thing that is a deep, infinite goal of mine. So I think getting rid of all friction is not a good thing. And friction also will pull you down into the catchment basins of like engagement maxing or whatever. There's all these things that are just the like salt, fat, gossip, us versus them stuff. That's like the catchment basin of like our brain stems. And the other point I'd make is that the physical world is like many orders of magnitude more friction than the virtual world. And so a ton of stuff that makes technologists go, oh, wow, we're really good at this. No, we're just playing on really easy mode because it's fully in the realm of bits. If you got to have atoms that move around in certain configurations in the world and like physically being transported to that, it's just orders of magnitude more difficult. And you could argue that one of the reasons you see such strong aggregation effects in virtual communities is one, the same origin paradigm, I think, really accelerates this. But two, it's also intrinsic. It's just that it runs the clock speed way faster because the friction is so much lower. So you see the sucking in of preferential attachment faster. And so when you introduce the friction of the real world, it makes it harder. That's one of the reasons I disagree with the 2027 report. One of the assumptions they make in it about AI and AGI or whatever, one of the assumptions they make is, oh, once it can start making robots on demand, then it's all over. It's like, it takes time and effort to get the materials, make them, and like test, like whatever. Like it's just, that's like a fundamental, like the universe only works at a certain clock speed. Kind of, it has like laws of physics that do not exist in the fully virtual realm. So I think that those different realms have very different manifestations. I imagine if you really think through the implications of the flip, the Copernican shift I'm talking about, you can get to some really weird places really quickly and go, wait a second. Why do retailers exist in this world? If you follow the thread, which Bernie and I have done for many years, over various bottles of wine and long conversations, it gets kind of funky and it gets kind of weird and it gets totally impossible for me to reason about. Bad things will happen in whatever emergent structure we're talking about because they always do. But like my hope is that we would unlock tons of good things that are sitting there waiting to exist that cannot exist in our current laws of physics. But it's very hard for me to imagine, how does this evolve in 5 years or 10 years? I honestly don't know. Maybe advertising. I was talking to someone about advertising. Advertising actually does do a useful thing, which is it helps you identify that there's a thing that you might want to do that it's annoying because it's constantly blaring at you and has no real ranking function that is operating to you. But if you had a system that said, here's my preferences, here's the thing I care about, and you had a bunch of advertisers that were trying to send stuff, and it only got through your filter if your filter actually thinks it's useful to you and earnestly thinks it's good for you, that's okay. I like that. Yeah, I got this thing through. Yeah, this one is really motivated to get through me, but my thing is, yeah, actually, this is a really great option. Like, it's a thing you care about. It's a really good option for it. It's cheap. It has good quality reviews from sites you trust. Like, it's a pretty good one. That's great. I love that. And that makes a thing where I, as a user, have a thing that works for me. And also, advertisers should like it because if you make quality products and that you can convincingly explain why they're quality, then you get through. And so you can imagine all kinds of weird implications and shifts and what have you. And it's dizzying, honestly, to think about because it's so many things we're used to. The force of gravity pulls down. And now I'm saying, oh, the force of gravity actually pulls that way. Okay, got it. And it's no, everything changes. Like I let go of the ball and it smashes through the wall. Like there's all kinds of implications that change when you change this thing that felt like a fundamental law of physics. And again, was just a human law that we came up with. That was just a convenient law to use for the past 30 years. But so I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know what it involves.
This shift, the center of friction being in the physical world, it's not exactly a qualitative shift, but it's like we do live in a world where you used to have more in common with your neighbors, the geographic polity, than you do with the people in your Discord server. And now, like you were saying, the path-dependent preferential attachment in that space being so much easier. One of the things I'm noticing is like solving for the millennial crisis of I don't find meaning in my work. You got the most meaningful work situation you can imagine. LLMs have solved product market fit for you, but there's this issue of not knowing my work is just to continue to pursue this thing that I find maxes relevance realization for me locally. I'm not aware of what value it possesses to other people. And thinking like an ecologist, I'm like, maybe this is not a problem because trees don't really understand what they're doing for fungi and animals. Everyone's just following their own sort of revenue model. And then their waste or pollution becomes the input for somebody else. And there doesn't have to be a unifying ecological self-awareness in which, those loops are just closing themselves.
But sometimes they break. I was talking to somebody years ago and advising them, and they were working in a ranking environment where they were trying to figure out a ranking change. It was some junior product manager who come to me for advice. I didn't know that well. They said, Alex, I'm not here for coaching. I'm here for object level advice. How do I get this proposal shipped? I said, okay. And so I said, what does your engineering manager think? What's the VP think? And they go, wait a second. Isn't this proposal bad for this set of creators in the ecosystem? Not like terrible, but distinctly worse than today by some margin. And isn't that bad for our users? Isn't that bad for us? Isn't that bad for society? And the person goes, who's to say? Because you're the one who's saying that we should pull this lever, so shouldn't you have an opinion? Is this going to be a good thing for society or a bad thing? And they said, listen, my goal is to increase watch time. My manager told me that I'm in danger of missing expectations. The goal for the company is to increase watch time. This will increase watch time. What do you want me to do? And it was like, oh, wow. Yeah, you're right. Like this person will get fired out of the system. And nobody in the system wants this thing that's going to harm creators or whatever. But like the metric does in the short term. And you fall into this stuff where I think if you were aware, I also had someone tell me at one point, you'd be a VP by now if you stopped thinking through the implications of your actions. And to me, that was the most damning statement they could have put. It's like, wow, cool. I do not want to be a VP then. But I think a world where it's easy to currently to ignore the indirect effects of your actions, I think even just being aware of them, our natural shame response and wanting to be part of society would help us make slightly more balanced decisions. And not saying that you have to change all that much, but sometimes you aren't even aware. That's what I'm saying, like therapy or whatever, you discover, oh, I wasn't aware how this thing that I do is affecting you. And now that I understand it, I should do it less because my intention is not to harm you in that way. And I didn't think through the indirect effects of my actions. And once you're aware of them, you might still say, okay, I'm still going to do it. Or you might say, oh, now that I'm aware of that, actually I'm going to balance that differently. And I hope that we're in a pro-social kind of environment that allows us to be aware of those, not necessarily frozen by them, but just aware so that we don't accidentally steamroll over other people or other things without being aware of it.
Yeah, that brings us all the way back around to the question I had for you earlier about setting your policy by values and intentions. And twice in one conversation now, Charles Stross, Accelerando, and his character Manfred Max, who's using his exocortex, this personal context engine, to file patents, but not just to file them, but to license them to the organizations that he plus his machine believes are going to have the most pro-social values. And this sort of constantly chasing the question of understanding the consequences of one's actions and how they feed back on the revision of those values. You know,
in
so
a feedback
like,
loop, and a thing that's evolving. You're never like, in Good Place, one of the later seasons, there's a character who's frozen by their indirect effects of their actions. They're the most moral person in the universe, and they do nothing, and that's obviously bad. So you want something that's like a learning loop where you are striving to do better over time, and you're striving to learn and understand disconfirming evidence and be aware that you are just one actor or this larger thing, and you get this feedback, and you can adapt and you can learn. And I think that is an important characteristic. You don't want perfection because then everything would be totally frozen. You want something that can respond to those signals, absorb them, reflect them. And that's why I'm saying that the example of a thing, if I could probably write up like a value statement. I could talk to an LLM for 10 minutes and have a value statement that would probably be pretty consistent for most of my life. For this period of my life, I want to spend high quality time with my kids, having deep, meaningful interactions with them in the world and the people in our lives that are important to us or whatever. And I want to maximize the amount of interesting new ideas I learn that challenge my thinking, that expand my circle of empathy, that help me be a more present and proactive member of my community and my family. But when you really reduce it down to a small set of things, a lot of things with high leverage kind of come out of that. And so then doom scrolling on LinkedIn because you can't get your Twitter and Facebook fix pretty obviously becomes like, that doesn't align with my intentions. And if there's a thing right now, like, you said you didn't want to do this, I'd be like, screw you. But if it tells me a few days later after I've become sober from that interaction, say, hey, does that actually align with what you intended? I could say, yeah, it does. And say, okay. Or it says, no judgment, just, okay, then it doesn't? Okay, then let's tweak does this make sense? We're going to tweak it so it's like this. Yeah, that makes sense. And I don't know, there's just something very powerful about that. But again, it has to be aligned. That's why I keep coming back to like intentional tech. I don't want big tech, I want better tech. I want tech that aligns with my intentions, with my aspirations and my agency. And that is not a thing that we fundamentally get today in the model where the person who owns your data is the one who wrote the code for whatever strange reason. And so that's the thing that I think it needs to change. But if we do, I think LLMs will be this massively positive force for human flourishing. And we can make that happen. We just got to do it,
Yeah. I guess there's something that's still sticky with me, and we've been touching on it throughout this conversation. Like the last little piece to work out is, and this is related to this idea of like bespoke software on demand, and like
infinite
a lot of it's going to be bad. But you said in the era of infinite software becomes an afterthought. And so you end up with a kind of like shitty software apocalypse where most of it is ephemeral. And this is another thing I talked about with Sam. It's like there's something about always being in the feedback loop, the living in an environment of ephemeral software, but you need those long, slow beats. You need the slower pace layers.
And you need a meaning. Like you need to have and this is why I think Software should fade away. Your data, your context, your meaning is what should matter. And the individual bits of software should be an afterthought. By the way, are you familiar with Clay Shirky's old essay about situated software? It's from 2004. It was actually the only copy of it on the internet now is on a Gwern mirror. And the basic frame is situated software is software that is situated to a very specific social context of like just for me or just for the two of us. And every time you built a spreadsheet or customized it, that's a piece of situated software. And to anybody who's not situated in that context, it looks like a piece of shit. It barely works, it's ugly, it's insecure. But to the people who use it, it's perfect. It's exactly what they need. And if they need a new feature, they will simply add it. And if there's an insecurity, they will simply fix it. And there's something powerful about shitty software from somebody else, gross. Shitty software from me, beautiful.
Well, everyone likes to smell their own. Is that
Yeah, exactly. Mine sounds great, I think. But
but it's like, I guess the general thrust there is, it seems like the fact that the software world is so frictionless, it clearly has enormous leverage on the physical world, and it's running into these natural constraints. But like more and more, there's a kind of ephemeralization of selfhood in these environments. And if all of the different contexts are kind of arising and decaying, we end up with a self that is not a persistent embedding over the lifespan of an individual.
We're each an evolving wavefront, right? As in, we've always been that way, and now I think we're closer to the idea. People who are at different stages, or that adult developmental theory of like self-authoring, self-transforming, and whatever, have different mindsets of themselves as a person. Oh, I am this way, or do you acknowledge that you can grow and change and that your beliefs can morph over time, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, that's a strength? I don't know. I think it's good in a world where if you are aligned with your aspirations, and your aspirations will change. My aspiration is to be thought of like a cool guy by these people in my school. That's the thing they might care about in high school. And later I might say, actually, no, my aspiration is to do things, to be proud of the indirect impact of my actions and to be proud of whatever's put on my tombstone and its impact on humanity. That's the thing that really motivates me. And maybe, I don't know, like maybe when you're later in your life and you haven't achieved some of those things, your goal is to just be a thoughtful member of your community and your family that helps them feel connected and whole with the world. Whatever. It could change over time, and that's okay. As long as it aligns with your intentions as opposed to your like, it's doom scroll or whatever.
Yeah. It's just like when I speak to Eric Davis and he talks about there's a difference between plasticity and flexibility in these systems. Like the consistency, or I like the thinking about where in a system should it be squishy? Where in a system should it be hard? Nod to Gordon Brander and Squishy Computer. Yeah. Right? Like, where do you want it to be adaptable? And it seems like the pressure is not toward this sort of persistent values nucleus that the modern world believed in. The pressure is toward being responsive, that therefore the threat is, okay, number 3 in the conversation, Charles Strauss's Glass House, where he says the digitization of the human being creates a system in which, we've defeated death. But now you have this existential horror of you never know if you've been hacked. And we're already there. It's like 5th generation warfare. Like you never really know that your values are your own.
Yeah, that's a good place to end, I feel. And I wrote in the bits about this week, if you're interacting with an intelligence or a system that has capacity, an order of magnitude or 2 beyond you, you don't even know if you're being played. Like you can't even perceive it. If the scramblers can think 3 orders of magnitude faster than you, or have computation 3 orders of magnitude faster than you, then like you don't even realize, you can't even perceive. I was talking to someone at SFI many years ago, and they're talking about, with self-driving cars, I thought, how are they possibly going to model the intentions of all the humans and where they might go, what their plans are? And the engineer goes, oh no, we run this 1,000 times faster than humans think. And so we don't need to. We simply see, did the person step into the street? And if so, we respond immediately. We don't have to have a theory of mind of each pedestrian. We just watch what they do because we're responding so much faster than humans think. And that really stuck with me. Like this notion of different pace layers are like almost mutually incomprehensible to each other. I can't even comprehend tree experiences of the world because they're a totally different pace than me. Have you seen, there's this old German stop motion from the early 2000s called Das Rad. Have you seen this? No. You should look it up. It's a little stop motion. It's about these rocks that are alive, but they move. There's like a stack of rocks and they move many orders of magnitude slower than humans do. And then it just shows human civilization and them next to each other, and they can't make sense of each other. It's well done, and it's cute, and it's kind of mind expanding.
Yeah. So I don't know. It seems like we don't have much choice there, but
yeah,
dude, this was fun. Took forever to get you on the show, but
we just got to this literally 1,000 times, but
yeah, half of them were mine.
Well, I think it's like 3/4 of them were mine, but okay.
Always a pleasure. Just in parting, if you have one piece of advice for people about living in the farthest you can see into the future, what is the one context-independent thing that you suggest people allocate their attention to?
I think using LLMs to think more, not to think less, but to think more, because now that you can think 10x cheaper than you could before, and owning your context, owning and maintaining that context of like your memories or whatever being on a turf that you fully know is aligned with your incentives, I think is really important. Because before, if you had all that information in one place, it wasn't possible at infrastructure scale to make sense of it. With LLMs, that makes it imperative that's on your turf in a way that it wasn't really quite as imperative before.
If we live in a world with demons, we might as well make them our demons.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome, dude. Take care. Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to learn more, links to Alex's writing, along with tons of related episodes and essays of my own, can be found in the links below. There you will also find links to our Discord server, information about membership in the Humans on the Loop online community, and how you can get all of that stuff by making recurring tax-deductible contributions at every.org. Humans on the Loop is a listener-supported project, and it exists entirely thanks to the generosity of people like you. Next week, we have a conversation on trust in the digital age with one of my many Australian friends, the wonderful Nate Kinch, followed by conversations with legendary biologist Stuart Kaufman, Tyson Yunkaporta, and many more. Until then, take care, and remember, attention is our greatest natural resource. Although, of course, that might mean our attention is someone else's resource, in which case, another good reason to be mindful.